Hello, I'm Richard Gizbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, retreat from the front line or attack on the headlines. The media management of the British pullout from Basra. Captured on tape. When should broadcasters show hostage videos? Disapproval ratings. The Egyptian human rights blogger and his fight to stay on YouTube. And Barney, the White House dog, is back with a new Christmas video and a cameo role for an old friend.
As someone born in Edinburgh, Scotland, it's always good to see the Scots doing well.
How do world statesmen find the time? Welcome back. As photo opportunities go, this one told its own story. A brief ceremony indoors, out of the line of fire. Not a retreat, the media were told, but a great step forward. There were two aspects to the British handover in Basra: the military transfer and the public relations offensive mounted by the British government to frame this story as a success, a sign of progress in Iraq. That's our starting point this week, the two versions of the Basra story. The one the British military were telling versus the one that much of the media went with.
It's Britain's slow fade out of Iraq.
What's the truth about the end of our occupation of Basra? Was it really an orderly withdrawal, or were we driven out?
The fate of Basra will lie officially in Iraqi hands once again.
The handover in Basra is the beginning of the end for the UK's involvement in Iraq, a big story. It also provides a textbook example of how the news media's approach to Iraq has changed since the invasion of 2003.
Most media outlets in Europe and America were in favor of liberating Iraq, of toppling Saddam Hussein. But now the situation is different. Most of them are cynical. They are skeptical of what's going on. They don't think the mission has been accomplished.
That context was evident in some of the coverage of the Basra story.
The British media itself has been very negative on the most part. Basically, you have newspapers like The Guardian, The Independent, the Daily Mail. They've called this not a handover of power, but actually a retreat.
Other newspapers have taken entirely the opposite approach and talk about victory, and so you get almost 2 or 3 different realities being transmitted through the media, which is very unusual in big stories like this.
The official signing ceremony was much...
This is a story that the UK government tried to tell through its commanding officer in Basra.
I came to rid Basra of its enemies, and I now formally hand Basra back to its friends.
Through its foreign minister, who traveled to Iraq.
It now has the chance, after 4 or 5 very difficult years, to really seize the moment.
And through its chief military spokesman there, who marshaled his talking points and used them.
We've never said that we were going to hand over a province that had a white picket fence around it and resembled something out of the Stepford Wives. We're not there to hand over a white picketed province that resembles something out of the Stepford Wives.
I think we have to be very mindful about how the military design programs for us, and we kick very hard to make sure that we push the boundaries of what we're given as much as we possibly can towards our agenda rather than their agenda. But I don't think it's a manipulation. I think it's just a management of what they can help us achieve, and of course that's limited and imperfect, definitely imperfect.
A formidable amount of energy goes into impression management.
We will hand over a manageable situation to the Iraqis, and that's exactly what we're doing. What it is a manageable security situation by the Iraqis. It is a security situation which is manageable.
The work that the military does, that the government does here in Europe, is really about selling the story to a domestic audience.
The thing about a media strategy is, it's not much good if it fails to foresee what's coming, like a simple but tough question.
Is it better than it was in 2003?
I don't know that I can answer that question.
I think the room for manoeuvre for spin in those circumstances is very small now. We all know the arguments, we know the circumstances, we know the pros and cons, we know the weaknesses, we know what the failures are. I think their ability to spin that story is really quite small now, and I think we, as UK broadcasters, would pick that up pretty quickly and puncture it if they try to do that.
Then there was the wrench in the works, delivered by Al-Qaeda in a media message from afar.
Al-Qaeda's second-in-command, Ayman al-Zawahiri, has said Britain's handover of security in southern Iraq shows that insurgents are gaining the upper hand in the country.
literally the moment as Britain is kind of leaving Basra and is kind of putting forward its big performance of at the signing-in ceremony, you get this video being released allegedly by Al-Qaeda, which calls into question the whole experience and accuses Britain of fleeing the battlefield in a sense.
In a video posted on the internet, al-Zawahiri says reports from Iraq point to the increasing power of the Mujahideen, or holy war fighters, and the decision of the British to flee is sufficient proof of this, he adds.
Al-Qaeda actually has transformed itself into an audio and videotape producer. I mean, the caves of Afghanistan have been converted into studios producing videotapes and audio tapes released through various stations and through various media outlets.
The other people telling the Basra story were the Arab media.
A lot of the Arab media are saying that actually Basra is very much a lawless city, that despite all of this talk of a handover of power, there really isn't any power that the British have to hand over to the Iraqis. So this question remains a very deep issue that's kind of lost in all of the rosy imagery of Iraqis taking control of their own city.
As British troops on the ground decline, the reasons for us and print media going in will get less, and other stories will take over and dominate. So it's kind of an aide-memoire to ourselves as we go into the new year that we mustn't do that, and we should keep a level of scrutiny, even though it's sort of the end.
The beginning of the end for Britain in Iraq. Basra was also a sneak preview of what will happen when, or if, the US pulls out. And American spin doctors from Washington to Baghdad would have been watching, drawing up their talking points for what will be an even bigger story. Our Global Village Voices now on Basra and who to believe.
As far as the newspaper headlines, hey, the British did a great job and we're leaving. It all goes to show you that the pen is mightier than the sword, at least in terms of perception. If the British say they've done a good job, by gosh, they've done a good job. But I think they've done a terrible job. The war in Iraq has not brought democracy to Iraq. As we all know, it's just brought mayhem. Basra a win? I really don't think so. Basra a bust? Probably. Definitely for the British. Probably for the Iraqi people. Basra is probably going to be best known as a mess.
The British media has not been that enthusiastic about this pullout from Basra, and the reason is Iraq, frankly, is no longer so sexy. Ever since Blair left office, the heat has been taken out of this story. There isn't this frenzied mania about pursuing him for all the chaos and disaster that was Iraq. Gordon Brown, on the other hand, is not held responsible, neither by the media nor by the general public. So frankly, it's no longer a domestic issue. It is an issue of foreign affairs, of defense. So this really hasn't got newspaper editors and broadcasters excited at all, and we're seeing a lack of enthusiasm for covering Iraq stories now.
We're always on the lookout for more Global Village Voices. Email us at listeningpost@aljazeera.net. If you have something to say about the global news media, we have the technology to get you on the air. Time now for Listening Post Newsbites. It was a case of now you see him, now you don't. But for the moment, Egyptian blogger Wael Abbas's YouTube channel is back. Abbas uses his YouTube channel to post videos of torture allegedly committed by Egyptian security forces. However, his material was taken down in November, and Google, which owns YouTube, explained that was because of its general policy against graphic violence lacking in context. Google was criticized and then says it reviewed the case and decided to reactivate Abbas's account. We contacted Abbas, who emailed us. Only YouTube knows the real story, he says. I don't want to sound paranoid by saying it was a conspiracy between the Egyptian government and YouTube, and I don't want to underestimate what happened by saying it was all a misunderstanding. The official state of emergency has been called off in Pakistan, but with less than a month to go before elections there, the country's media are still running scared. The Pakistan Media Regulatory Authority recently announced that a failure to play by the new broadcasting rules would result in a 3-year prison sentence, a cancellation of license, and a 10 million rupee fine. That's about 165,000 US. TV channels were all required to sign a government code of conduct before being allowed back on the air last month. Despite the new code, which bans criticism of the president on the airwaves, the Musharraf administration has promised the January elections will be free and fair. The American TV network CBS is at loggerheads with the Pentagon and the Bush administration over the network's reporting of the high rate of suicides among U.S. Iraq War veterans.
A 5-month state-by-state survey by our investigative team has uncovered a troubling and tragic epidemic among our military veterans, an epidemic of suicide.
Unable to get the details on veteran suicide rates from the U.S. government, CBS says it launched its own investigation and published numbers far higher than the government would confirm. That led to a media scrap. The New York Post, which supports the Iraq War, argued CBS was trying to increase opposition to the war. Despite, or perhaps because of the controversy, the U.S. Congress's Veterans Affairs Committee held public hearings on the suicide issue. The striking TV writers in the U.S., who we reported on 2 weeks ago, are about to lose two of their most important sympathizers, U.S. talk show hosts Jay Leno and Conan O'Brien. Both NBC shows went on hiatus shortly after the strike began, but they are now preparing to go back on the air early in the new year, strike or no strike. The two late-night shows will try to go ahead without writers, but may find it hard to book guests since so many actors and performers say they support the strikers. The conflict between the writers and the studios that employ them comes down to internet content and whether writers are entitled to a share of the money generated when a show airs over the World Wide Web. Buying the Wall Street Journal was a big deal for Rupert Murdoch, and he made sure the world knew about it. In a $2 million global advertising blitz last week, Murdoch's News Corp celebrated its buyout of Dow Jones, the owner of the Journal, with a 3-page ad in newspapers all over the world, including some owned by News Corp's rivals. The ad counters critics of the buyout who have said the august Wall Street Journal will never be the same. Murdoch's response? Exactly, and that's a promise. Coming up after the break, the broadcaster's dilemma, the hostage video, and whether to put it on the air.